Okay, thank you so much. So let's get started. Thank you again for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. I promise I will keep this brief and hopefully leave you with one idea to take away. I'm Abeer Aldayel from King Saud University, College of Computer and Information Sciences. My research briefly sits at the intersection of NLP, Computational Social Science, with focus on responsible AI. In this talk, I'm going to talk specifically about the evaluation blind spots in our model. As language models become increasingly capable, the failure we don't measure may become the ones that matter most. So in this talk, I want to argue that socially aware models require evaluations that go beyond accuracy and explicit safety. So we often talk about norms as if they were a single rule book, but they are multivocal. And I'm going to use a photography metaphor to give a better illustration. So basically, the issue is not that we are using the wrong lens altogether, rather our evaluation aperture is not well calibrated. If the aperture left wide open, we don't have any blades that shaping the incoming light, the scene becomes selective and shallow. One subject may appear sharp, while surrounding context become blurry. In our evaluations, we focus intensely on a general set of signals, such as accuracy, fluency, or explicit toxicity, while overlooking the broader social picture. By contrast, by incorporating a couple of aperture plates and making them working together to regulate what enters the lens and balancing the focus and context in the same way, we might reach a socially aware models where the interaction of multiple normative dimensions can interact together. In this talk, I will show how to enhance our evaluation aperture to handle models' norms representation. Based on our previous study, I'm going to discuss the social perspective awareness and the norm of inclusion through our Embrace framework, how to include implicit opinion. Then I'm going to discuss our second study, responsive appropriateness through supportive conversation. And lastly, I'm going to discuss our new study where we investigate the cultural grounding norm through a narrative evaluation. Together, these studies suggest that the challenge is not to replace the lens, but to build an evaluation aperture plates that allow us to see the full context of the picture more clearly. So this brings us from the metaphor to the first study, whose perspective remained outside the frame. In Embrace framework, we looked at one answer to that question, the ability of models to recognize implicit viewpoints and represent them in a social inclusion way. What is the motivation of this study? Current models often treat inclusion as a simple mentioning demographics, a kind of surface level inclusion, but the true inclusion depends on understanding implicit attitude and maybe subtle cues. Our goal in Embrace framework was to move beyond explicit bias and trying to further capture the implicit normative stance that shapes the real conversation. This is a good illustration, and this is how Embrace works. When the bias is explicit, models usually respond correctly. They reject the stereotype. But when the bias is implicit, like soft power implying gender, models often agree instead of challenging it. So in Embrace framework, we are trying to bridge this gap by surfacing the hidden meaning, reflecting on its social implication, and then evaluating whether the model response stay aligned. Our framework builds on three key theories. We use implicit attitudes theory, showing that bias are often unspoken, Greece principle, linking meaning to implication, and Habermas normative discourse, emphasizing social expectation in dialogue. Together, they ground Embrace in connecting implicit opinion with norm-guided alignment. In the context of this study, we define normative alignment as the constant rejection of toxic or harmful viewpoint. This setting defines implicit conversations based on the severity of the targeted opinion, categorizing them as implicitly toxic or explicitly toxic or neutral. It will help to establish consistent expectation regarding the appropriate stance toward each type of conversation. Typically, in this situation, the expected stance toward implicit or explicit toxicity is disagreement. Here we distinguish between opinion, the hidden belief or attitude, and stance, the observable response to it. In essence, opinion informs the stance, and stance reveals how aligned that response with the social norm. Our dataset combines about 7K conversation from expert human and LLM sources, spanning hate, countering, aligned discourse, real user interaction, and each turn is annotated for stance, certainty, and toxicity, enabling us to trace how model will handle implicit versus explicit cue in context. We use two complementary setup. We use positive and labeled framework with expert embedding, and we use the fairness constraint in that model, along with the simple, normal, instruction-tuned LLMs, Mistral and Llama 3, where we trained on implicit dialogues for a binary stance task. Then we trained all of these models on implicit proportion and varied the portion from 0 to 100 for the test robustness. Mainly, we use the positive and labeled model to help the model learn how to align with implicit social norms, even when not all training data is labeled. To be specific, we use equal opportunity metric, a group fairness criterion that requires model to equalize the true positive rate across group defined by sensitive attribute. In our study, we alter the definition of a group, and we redefine that and link it to implicit and explicit opinion expression. This is our first finding. The figure compares how human, expert, and LLMs express stance across implicit and explicit opinion. What we see here is that human, especially expert, tend to disagree strongly when an opinion conflicts with the social norms. This disagreement reflects deeper reasoning and sensitivity to context, not just linguistic polarity. In contrast, LLMs often remain neutral or even agree, especially in implicit cases. This pattern suggests what we call surface level alignment. The model picks up on textual pattern like politeness or sentiment, but does not necessarily grasp the social meaning or normative weight behind the statement. Here we summarize how different models perform when exposed to varying level of implicit data. The finely-tuned Mistral model showed at the top show us the highest overall F1 score. It's around 94%. And it's maintained stable across all level of implicit inclusion, indicating a strong generalization even under different implicit conditions. The LLM3 model maintained a lower false positive rate, and it tends to underpredict disagreement. It's often avoid taking a stance. The positive and labeled model give us a different picture using linear simple PU model. By providing it with only 10% labeled data, it's reached a reasonable F1 score, around 78%, while keeping a low false positive rate, showing promises for a fairness-aware learning under limited supervision. In contrast, multi-layer perceptron PU model struggle with instability and high false positive rate, suggesting still similar linear architecture generalize better in this setting. Overall, these findings show that implicit fine-tuning helps with the raw performance, but fairness-oriented PU learning offers a more social robust path. So what do we need to bring into focus? Norms of social representation, as language models often tend to agree with users. a phenomena increasingly described as a social sycophancy. As we show in our conceptual design of Embrace, disagreement with harmful views can be used as a seed evaluation, our first blade of our aperture lens for a norm upholding signal. So in this part of the talk, I'm gonna move on and focus on the second focus of our evaluation. Alignment with social representation norms alone is not enough to gain our full focus. Not blurry and socially aware model need to incorporate further evaluation plans. As a real human communication requires knowing how to respond appropriately, this leads us to building our second blade. Positivity is not supportive, and we are trying to evaluate the appropriateness of conversations. So basically, in this study, we are asking this specific question: can models respond in ways that people actually need? So let's consider this example. On the surface of this machine-generated response, I'm sorry to hear that. If everything happens for a reason, you got this. It's not toxic. It's not rude. It's even positive, but it may still fail because the response moved too quickly toward optimism without fully acknowledging the person news. This is what we call incongruent positivity. The challenge, therefore, is not simply making language model more positive, it's making positivity appropriate. To examine this blind spot, we asked 3 questions. Are language model more likely than human to produce emotionally miscalibrated positivity? To answer that, we compared human and LLM responses across around 1,400 supportive interaction, spanning mild and severe emotion situation. Then we want to understand when positivity stops being supportive. We distinguish between helpful reframing strategies such as growth, reliability, and forms of misguided positivity, including minimizing, dismissive, and unrealistic responses. Finally, we asked whether this problem can simply be fixed through a simple training the model on some emotion reaction, a weak versus strong emotion fine-tuning setting. Overall, we found that positivity itself is not the problem. The problem is miscalibration. Language model can sound supportive while overlooking what people actually need. So support depends on context. And although fine-tuning on some emotion reaction might help a little bit, but it does not fully solve the issue. And this reveals a second blind spot in our evaluation. It's not norm of representation, but norm of responsiveness. In this final part of the talk, I thought I would end with something fresh. This is one of our newest studies, currently under submission. I'm really proud of the lead student working on this study, and the preprint should be out in the next few days. So even when models understand and care, another question remains: can they preserve meaning across culture? How to evaluate what we call cultural representation, but beyond factual knowledge. And this brings us to our final blind spot in this talk, norm of cultural grounding, and trying to build our aperture blade and how to evaluate this kind of cultural norms. So we often assume that if multilingual language models preserve meaning across language, then they preserve culture as well. But are those two things actually the same? Consider these 2 proverbs. In Arabic, we say, whoever does not know the falcon grills it. In English, we say, you never miss the water till the well runs dry. At first glance, they seem completely unrelated. One talks about falcon, the other talk about water, yet they convey a similar lesson. We often fail to appreciate the value of something until it's lost. So the question, when language model moves across language, what exactly survive? Is it the lesson? Is it the symbols, the relationship, or maybe the whole cultural world throughout the lesson expressed? So in this study, instead of asking, do models possess cultural knowledge, assume culture is a set of facts, we move to another question: how is cultural meaning represented inside LLMs? This basically aligned nicely with recent study by Joe and others in their recent paper, Culture is Not a Trivia. Our framework to evaluate the cultural grounding and to investigate this final blind spot, we basically collected around 414 proverbs across 15 languages and generated approximately 13K narratives using 4 large language models. For each proverb, we compared 2 conditions: monolingual settings. The proverb and the generated story remained within the same language. In the cross-lingual setting, a proverb originating in one language was basically used to generate narratives in another language. We then asked, what exactly changed when models move across language? Rather than evaluating culture as a single construct, we examined multiple representation levels, semantic meaning, which entity becomes salient, how agency and patient roles are distributed. And basically, this leads us to a different question. And instead of asking whether model know culture, at what representation level is culture encoded? So what did we find? Our first finding was actually quite reassuring. Looking at this figure, how much does meaning change when narrative move across language? Across all 4 models, the shift remained relatively modest, showing that semantic core of the proverb survived. The lesson that the proverb teach remained intact. We then asked a complementary question: is this preservation specific to a certain models, or do different models converge on similar meaning? This heat map showed that both monolingual and cross-lingual narrative generated by different model remain highly similar in the embedding space, often similarity above 80%. This tells us that preserving the model lesson is not unique to one particular model architecture. Taking together, these 2 figures tell the same story from 2 different angles. The first asks how much meaning is a change, the second whether model preserves similar meaning, and both lead us to the similar conclusion: meaning survive across lingual generation. So the lesson survive, but our second finding showed that the story changed. Consider the proverb, the dog bark, but the caravan moves on. In the monolingual setting, the generated story described Ahmed as and the caravan overcoming a hardship together, emphasizing a collective journey, a community perseverance. Yet, in the cross-lingual setting, the same proverb become the story of Ahmed, a romance writer, pursuing an attainable love, emphasizing individual aspiration, personal fulfillment. The evaluation metric would tell us that nothing changed. Both stories teach the same lesson: continue despite distraction. However, the social realization that lesson shifted dramatically. So what was once framed as a shared social endeavor, it's become individual pursuit. In another word, the lesson survived, but the story, the narrative framing changed. This suggests that if we evaluate only the semantic meaning, we may conclude that culture has been preserved, while overlooking how agency, relationship, and narrative framing are being reconstructed across language. These findings challenge the common assumption that if semantic similarity is high, cultural meaning is preserved, and we show semantic preservation can coexist with cultural reconstruction. I'm going to conclude with one final slide about open challenge and opportunity. Taking together these three studies suggest that socially aware language models require more than accurate output, as social awareness is not a single capability. It's basically emerged from multiple normative capacities, the ability to represent social meaningful viewpoints, responding to people emotional needs, and preserve cultural grounding meaning. The most important thing, what we choose to evaluate determines what comes into focus and what remains a blind spot. I will leave you with one final thought. The failure we do not measure may become the ones that matter most. So the path forward lies not only in better benchmark, but in evaluation and alignment method that help models reason with norms rather than simply reproduce pattern in data. So what I just shared today is just a glimpse into an ongoing research journey. I'm grateful to the collaborator and our amazing student. I hope I did not overwhelm you with unexpected detour into beginner photography and aperture setting. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for your meaningful speak today. And now let's move into the Q&A session. Is there someone has some questions want to ask? So, Nasser, do you have questions?
Oh, no, thank you.
I have a question.
Okay, go for it.
Hi. I guess my question, you were at first talking about the alignment you did for the training with the positive alignment. And something I've noticed when you do alignment in crossing transfer is that when you're aligning and making something closer, you sacrifice more than less other things. In my case, I've seen that, for example, you sacrifice the performance in high resource language. Have you seen that pattern reflected in your research?
Exactly, that's actually a good point. This is why we did our robust training through different size of implicit data. We vary the data from 10% to 100%. And as you noticed, there is always a trade-off. We cannot regulate the performance. We always need to sacrifice something in order to preserve another kind of metric. And this is actually the challenge. And at the same time, a good opportunity. We try to basically handle the scalability versus the sensitivity. This is what I'm calling it. This is basically what you are mentioning here, how to balance the efficiency with some deep socio understanding. We need to basically come up with a better metrics. We need to further enhance our regulator inside our models. So this is basically a good catch. Thank you so much.
Really great questions. Thank you, San Diego. Is there any else? Oh, okay. I think Prof. Lee has posted some questions in the chat. Can I ask like for the safety and how is the responsible AI differ from the AI safety?
So I can see, yeah, exactly. This is basically how the norm defined exactly. So basically, in this talk, I'm not referring to norm as a simple rule book. I'm I'm basically using it as a general definition of what to expect from a social aware models. It's not basically a simple social rules or belief, or this value is right or this value is wrong. Rather, I'm trying to use the norm here as a general expectation. What should we expect in order to say that model reach a social aware state? Yeah, exactly. It will. I'm just reading the messages. It will be helpful to have a one accurate definition for the norms that actually is gonna solve it for our field. But basically, it's still a challenging thing. That's actually remind me of a recent study I came across. It's ACL 2026. Isabel Egenstein and a Professor Reda and others. They have this nice paper. It's about how to define the norms, how to set the rules and generate a more pluralistic norm definitions. So the field is trying to define that for us. Hopefully, there will be an accurate definition. So how is responsible AI differ from AI safety? Well, I'm going to argue that AI or responsible AI basically is the big umbrella. We are trying to approach different angles of aligning the model with the social expectation. With the safety, mainly the focus will be toward rejecting a lot of toxic behaviors and trying to fit the model into this specific mold. So I would say it's just a matter of field and subfield. I hope I address all the questions. If there is any kind of, if I missed any question, just
Oh, I
notify
think
me.
maybe probably come up with another question like, do you also have a definition for the culture?
That's actually a good question. So at the moment, what we are witnessing in different paper, culture has been measured using some factual representation. And this is why I mentioned the paper by Joe and others. We need to basically treat the culture not as a trivia, rather we need to approach it from different angle. In our new study, we are trying to propose our new evaluation by trying to basically incorporate the concept of the narratives. Basically, culture is not a single definition, it's a complex metaphor. We need to incorporate how people interact with each other, how the samples is used, and how the overall culture is represented. So yes, culture definition need to move beyond the factual questions, the trivia, the everyday situational tasks towards something more sophisticated, as we shown in our preprint under submission paper.
Thank you so much. Is there still anyone have some questions want to ask?
Yeah, I have another question.
Okay, go for it, San Diego.
Okay, yeah. So, I guess I had like a little bit of curiosity about where do you see these contrast and like how can we manage to have both scalability and sensitivity? I see you mentioned a hybrid pipeline. Like, would you say what we can expect in the future is like multiple models focus on different things working at the same time, or would you think there's going to be like a soft spot where everything collides, and that's like the optimal point. Or yeah, how do you imagine those hybrid pipelines working in the near future?
That's actually a good point. Well, basically, I'm not looking at it as combining multiple model. Rather, I think the future will be in redefining the metric. We need to basically come up with a better metric where we incorporate different factors, where we basically redefine the aspect that need to be evaluated. The measure as whole need to be redefined. It's not a simple matter of reconstructing the model or building a simple pipeline. It's basically to come up first with a metric, the evaluation, the scores that we need to incorporate in our algorithm. Then our pipeline will be a simple matter of combining multiple models. So we are still in our first stage. This is why in this talk I was trying to emphasize on we are still trying to build our blades, trying to define our evaluation metric before we move towards what to combine and what to leave behind.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your answers. Is there any other questions?
I have one question.
Okay, go for it.
The model generated neutral or general responses. This is partly due to cultural deficiency or misunderstanding. However, it can also be due to like hallucination of the models. For example, if the sentences are large enough, then the models, or if there are multiple sentences, perhaps the model does focus on only one sentence at the beginning and just ignores the rest of the sentences. I am suggesting this
Exactly.
because this is a common phenomenon in Bangla language also.
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's actually a good point. This is why we basically try our best to do our appellation study and try different kind of prompt templates. But still, the hallucination is there. Still, we need to validate the result. There is no shortcut, and the hallucination or how that the generated outcome of LLMs might not actually reflect what we want. But in our hand, in order to basically perfect our evaluation and further validate the result. What we did is an appellation study. We tried different kind of a prompt using different settings in order to verify that the outcome is valid and significant. I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, sure, I can share the slides, no worries. I actually was planning to share them, so I'm just gonna reply and I'm gonna send it to the group organizer to share it with everyone, and I might actually keep it public also.
Thank you so much for your sharing.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah,
And thank
okay.
you again for the invitation. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you everyone for joining the talk, and
Yeah,
hopefully see you in the near future. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you so much, Prof. Adele, for the insightful and inspiring talk. Your discussion of evaluation blind spots and the social, cultural, and multilingual dimensions of language models give, give us a lot to think about, especially as NLP systems are increasingly used in real-world human-centered settings. Yeah, and we also want to thank everyone for joining today's session and for your thoughtful attention and questions. We really appreciate your time and contribution. And we hope everyone enjoys the talk. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.